Hey guys, here for George's, and we're at D1 Studios with the D2 robotic arm. And today we have the Sonny Brano, a few dancers, and we're gonna meet the masterminds behind this technology. Let's get into it. Firstly, we're gonna meet Rohan, the lead of visual effects at D2MOTION. Let's check it out.
My name is Rohan Merrill, and I help with VFX pipelines over here, making sure that the robot gives you as much data as is needed. And I also do a lot of the marketing for the robot, so I get to be very excited and talk about it.
Multifaceted, mate. I love it.
One thing that immediately stood out to me is that, especially having had a background in VFX, the reason that I got involved in motion control in the first place is that everybody in VFX gets excited about the fact that you can get information out of a camera's movement. So many visual effects are based upon repeated movements. The fact that you can shoot two different plates, cut one, place part of it over another, is the basis of most of the visual effects, especially the ones that are the most interesting. So especially since I mostly showed up from a sort of CGI generalist point of view, all of my experiences in the past hadn't been as much with the sort of bells and whistles of motion control. It's mostly the philosophical backing as to why and how it's used on set. The main points beyond, actually having something function as a camera arm that moves from point A to point B is to be able to output a 3D camera, be able to give you the information about how it moved, and then be easy enough to use so that you actually end up using it on set. The idea was to not have productions build their shoots around a tool, instead have our tool fit into any creative idea that you have. That goes into small ways, like the Mitchell mount that we use, that is meant to make the arm combine with other systems, but also the ease with which you can just output information from the arm. My connection to D2MOTION started a few years ago when, honestly, I didn't like using motion control. Especially from the VFX side. Often you are promised a lot of things that aren't necessarily delivered by a robotic arm on set. And that can also be frustrating because then you start to build up this culture of, right when the arm shows up on set, everybody takes a deep breath. They're like, are we going to be working overtime? Is this going to be difficult, right? So the reason that I'm here and the reason that I have gotten so excited about this tech is that it's the first motion control arm that has been based between two different worlds. One where you have a ton of different options, and the other where they're curated enough so that you have a direction to go at all times on set and in post.
Is there any type of easing? Is there like slowing down to a movement? Because sometimes with robotic arms, I feel it's too robotic.
Yeah.
And that easing from one.
What's great is that a lot of these choices, leaning back on that, intuitive practice, a lot of these choices have defaults. So even though I'm saying, here's point A, here's point B, a lot of choices are being made as to how we move between those points.
Yes, exactly.
Then those points can be further controlled by an operator. Say, I talk with Dan and I say, well, at this end point, can we actually just like bubble up and level out? Then he can say, all right, I'm just going to make the actual roll zero out. And adjustments like that end up being an important point of the sort of back and forth that you have with a cinematographer. As an operator, you're saying, how much specificity do you want? And how much do you want to just get going?
Can you tell me about like how would that help in VFX, like the amount of data you can take out from the robot?
Absolutely. So there's a couple different sides to that. One side is that the fact that the robot is designed to be combined with a ton of other tools means that you can, say, mount it on the dolly and start to push it around, get the organic motion of that influencing what is a robotic arm, right? But also, you lean a lot into the operator's sense of how to effectively build a quote-unquote robotic shot versus just a smooth shot, or even something that is just trying to use the speed of a robot. In most cases, we've had a big blend of, on some shoots, you'll show up and they say, well, this is just a logistical tool. It's a super quick to program system. If you can roll it around, especially you have the larger arms, you have smaller arms that you can put inside tight, cramped environments. Since you don't have any extra stuff with computers, maybe it's just a fast way to get very straightforward moves. Some people even use it as just a grabbing, super flexible tripod that ends up being like, hey, if you're on tabletop, you want to get a ton of different shots, you just take point A, point B, and move on around in that sense. That being said, it's more of a platform where you can get a variety of things out of the system, but it comes down to a combination of the operator's sense of how to do that the DOP's sense of what they're first trying to achieve,
Yeah.
and then the way that you combine it with other hardware, if you end up combining it. Since today we're interested in doing a VFX shot, from the ground up, essentially what we're doing is taking this range of motion and saying, first, what is your creative? What is the shot that you're trying to achieve? Then we say, how many passes would that need? If we're trying to clone people, if we're trying to somehow make a visual effect that has to be described in layers, how many times we're shooting. Then we're going to shoot all the different passes that we need, as well as a clean plate, make sure that we have a background, and in post we can stick those all together. What's great is that you don't necessarily have to think past that, because suddenly the robot's doing a lot of the work for you, because it's going to be consistent. It's going to have the same repeatability. And then suddenly you can say, well, this is a release-based trigger on the robot, on the touchpad. So your operator can be very specific about when they start, when they stop. You can even program in beeps and little flashing lights to sync things up in post.
Oh, fantastic.
So those sort of things very much lean into the VFX wheelhouse, but they also work in conjunction with stuff that Sony's been doing and a lot of lens manufacturers that have been far more data-driven than in past years. As time goes on, everybody wants more information. So along with outputting a 3D camera, you can output a ton of lens information if you have associated sort of cook lenses and stuff like that. And Sony's doing great work in that whole domain. What I like is that in my own work doing VFX supervision, all that I've ever leaned into is the sheer amount of measurements you have to take. With this system, essentially what you're saying is that it's measuring to itself an origin that's in the base. As long as you know where that base is, the great thing about having an arm is that everything else can be mathematically sorted out by a mind other than your own. And what's great is that then I get to stare at, well, what sort of lens do we have on? So we've got a 40mm, what f-stop are we at, t-stop are we at? Those sort of readings end up being far easier to get because they're all in front of you and you don't have to be doing a ton of guesswork with measuring stuff out in full 3D space. So if I were to talk to a VFX supervisor about what sort of measurements they're doing, you're saying, well, you're doing a VFX shot. Where's the robot in height? And everything else will just be placed in relation to the robot. So you get one measurement. I think that the biggest deal that shows up in sort of the wheelhouse of what makes this system special, because if we're talking about technical specifications, these robots aren't made to be the flashiest of like speed or something like that. There isn't necessarily a pile of, science experiments or anything that stands out as saying motion control's been around for a long time, right? We've had arms, we've had the ability to move from point A to point B, we've gotten better at doing that. But what this introduces, and back to the philosophy about this, is that it improves the speed at which you can do that on set, but it also changes the way that I talk as an operator to a DOP. All of this is based on communication. The fact that I can grab this, move it from point A to point B, offers a way to talk and say, hey, do you want to grab it? And do you want to move it around? Say, do you want to be hands-on, as opposed to having this barrier between the robot and production? We want to actually be another member on set. And then you get to say, all right, we've had that connection. You feel viscerally that this is the shot that you want, you've framed it up. Now I can help you with more specific controls. And so that ends up, in my eyes and in my experience as an operator, being the biggest deal. The fact that you instill that confidence in the other people on set. If I were to sum up the whole goal that we have as motion control, is that we want to almost disappear on set. We want to just be something that facilitates your work. It's not, there's always, we get excited if you're like, oh, robots look cool, right? But at the same time, this is not the point. Your creative is the point, right? So if this can help it and then not cause problems and then just be there in the background and make it work, we've done a great job.
Oh, mate, that's just fantastic. You know what? Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Dude, you're such a great speaker. Now that we played a bit with the D2 robot arm, let's talk to Dan, the lead technical director and the chief robotic engineer.
Daniel Miller. I'm working for D2MOTION. I do most of the back-end technical development and also operate the robots on set.
I guess one of the hurdles is always operate a side of the robot versus the DOP. Now, what does it do that helps, I guess, the end goal for the DOP, for the creative? Like, well, what's the easiest thing that it does for the shoot?
Yeah, I think it really allows the DOP to still be hands-on in the process. So we're just talking about kind of that initial discussion phase, but very frequently, I'd say especially with the most successful people with the arm, they're not using it to max it out and do the most wild and crazy thing. They are using it just to hit interesting camera angles and get motion that they otherwise couldn't practically get. And really what shines, I think, to really kind of loop the DOPs back into the process, who I think feel often kind of left out in the rain with a lot of motion control systems, is that they don't have to route every request through an operator and be like, hey, can you pan a little left, or can you get the machine really over here, and then watch someone, place a button and, well, do, exactly like this, and over here, over there, without having those additional steps that really block the creative process. They can find the angles that really work for them, and that, I think, just really distributes the creative process more, to everyone, especially the people who's, really are thinking about that in the background. So usually just trying to nail down what the creative vision is outside of the tools, because I feel like that's something that I see a lot of creatives sometimes stumble into, is they think, let's get a robotic arm, and that's a substitute for actually having a creative.
Yep.
And so the first thing you do as an operator usually is to really talk to them about, just imagine it's a floating camera in space, what's the end product gonna look like? And then kind of go backwards from there on. Well, what robot's the right tool for the job? What's the practical way we're actually gonna make this happen? How do I break down some arbitrary camera motion they've waved around with their phone into, this is what the keyframes are gonna be. This is how I can take that from an artistic vision and put it into the literal what it's gonna do.
I think one of the best things is being creative and being the camera operator, being able to really, like you said, hunt and find my angles and find the shot where it needs to be. And how did you come up with that? And how did you, I guess, form that way of thinking?
I can't say that it was, some inspiration idea that any one of us came up with.
Yeah.
It was really kind of an organic process over years of, we started on set with much larger arms that didn't have that functionality where everything's trying to be routed through me, and just kind of seeing where the friction is in production. And, not every move was even intentional. It's, well, let's get these arms because, they're lightweight, portable, they can do, simpler stuff. And just through the years seeing what really clicks with people and makes people want to use the system again.
Yeah.
What makes, a shoot from, oh my God, it's motion control, we're gonna be here all day, to, oh, it's motion control, hey, it's gonna be quick, we're not gonna have to, move a bunch of furniture or, position sliders. It'll just be, set a couple keyframes and away you go.
Now, I as a creative and as a camera operator myself, one thing that I feel this is amazing at is letting the creatives be creative. Like, can you speak to me about that?
Yeah, exactly. It's really, well, like you said, it's about letting the creatives be creative and use a very technical tool without necessarily needing to be really technical themselves. Because I think that there's a kind of a chasm a lot of the time between your engineers and your operators and your creatives, where your engineers and operators will have very specific words and formulas and nomenclature that, explicitly defines things, and your creatives aren't necessarily trained and up to date, in all that terminology. And it's not that they are not technical in their own right, and it's not that they don't have an unambiguous vision of what they want. It's just that a lot of times they have a hard time communicating it. And like I said before, a lot of the development process here that's gotten us where we were has been taking that explicit but vague terminology of, I want the camera to do this, and give people, give operators especially, a set of tools that instead of fighting with them on it and, well, you need to adapt to what I'm doing, and give the operators a place to meet them, halfway or more, where they say, oh, you want that? Well, I've got, a tool that is exactly that, and go from there. And what this big lighting grid allowed us to do was really give people, you know, that big soft source, but also with granular control as far as, you know, they could really hunt around and shape the light and, oh, well, you know, this section of the box is reflecting that section of the car. We want to kind of, you know, dim that section and brighten this section to make the bits we want pop. And then obviously, you know, these are stereotitan tubes, so they've got 16 pixels each. And, you know, the software's set up to control, you know, all of them to that maximum resolution and do, you know, your standard effects, you know, your waves, strobes, fades, all that stuff.
Hey guys, we had so much fun with the D2 robot arm today. We got to see so much cool technology and all the things it could do. If you guys want to know more about the D2 robot arm, head into George's cameras or the website at georges.com.au. I'll see you next time.